This is a video where I'm just going to explain some of the advanced settings within KeywordXP. First of all, right from the top here, we have a box here that's called the SEMrush API key. If you use SEMrush, then you can enter in your API key here, and an extra tab will appear, and you'll be able to search across SEMrush data as well. The second two checkboxes here, one's called Show Competition and Enable Debugging. Now, Enable Debugging is a feature that you may be asked to from support, where we can try and diagnose what's happening in the background, and we may ask you to switch this option on, and it will show the application logging into Google so we can get some feedback, and we may ask you to do some screenshots. The Show Competition option enables these two extra tabs, the title competition and the URL competition. And the reason we don't leave them on as default is because if you do too many of these, it can generate a captcha from Google, which is not really a problem, but some people find that difficult to manage, and so it's often easier to leave that switched on and leave it switched off and just enable it to be turned on for advanced users only. So all you'd have to do for competition is to highlight the words you're interested in and click on Check Competition. And what it's actually doing is it will look for occurrences of those keywords in the title and in the URL on Google. Okay, so it's coming back with the number of results in Google that have the mention of that phrase either in the title or in the URL. Okay, so it can give you an indication of how many people are actually targeting these keywords and give you a clue as to how competitive the keyword is for you to target. So as I said, if you do quite a few of these, and I recommend only doing like 3 or 4 at a time, then what you may get is a captcha. And a captcha is where Google's asking you whether you're a robot or not. And if it appears, then obviously we're not a robot, we're doing this manually, but it runs this check every so often to find out, and it asks you to type in a keyword. And all you do is type in the keyword and click OK, and the captcha will disappear. So I'm just going to do this a few more times, just so I can show you with the captcha when it appears. So it's quite random, but it's normally where you might run like 10 or so in a time. So there you go. So this is a captcha, and it's asking me to type in HOLOY, and it will keep doing this for the number of words that you are asking for the competition on. Okay, so even though I've entered it a few times, it still keeps doing it until it's cleared all of them. Okay, so I entered in the captcha probably about 4 or 5 times, so 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So those are the values that it asked me to enter in the captcha. So there's no problem doing that. It just can be a bit frustrating, especially if you select like 15 keywords at a time, for example. Then you'll end up in what seems like forever entering captchas. And that's why we leave that just for advanced users. So let's go back to the settings again. So domain match options, this is when you're searching for domain names and where it's checking and creating domain names to check for availability. And these are the parameters where you can adjust how long the domain length is and how many words to check for. So in other words, when it constructs a domain, what's the maximum number of words it can use to construct a domain. To be honest, I would just leave these as default. They're very, very advanced and very rarely used. The Google account is the account you're actually using at the time. You'll see my email blurred out there just for confidentiality, but you can add more Google accounts and switch between them if you need to. There's not really a reason to do that, but the facility is there if you need to do it. And this option here, where you've got this list of different data centers and different URLs, is where you're providing extra data centers for Google to search upon, and those data centers appear in this drop list here. Okay, so if there's a data center that doesn't exist there, okay, you can actually add it in this section here. And these second two columns, about and results, these are the actual words that are used to identify the title and URL competition on screen. So, not mandatory to put them in, but if you want to use the competition checker, then this is where you'd enter in those values. Okay, so that's the data centers section, and again, as I said, you can add, edit any of these data centers, and if you're using a particular data center in general, you can make it the default one by highlighting it and clicking Set Default. So if I'm in Australia, for example, then I can click on Set Default, and that means every time we use KeywordXP, it will always search on the Google AU data center by default. The Configure Questions section is where KeywordXP will use these sentence and question constructors to create tests to find out what questions people are actually asking Google. So the default here as standard is how to, who, what, when, where, why, but there are extra ones as well, and you can turn these on simply by highlighting them and clicking on OK. When you do that, you need to restart KeywordXP for it to pick up the changes that you've made. But essentially, this whole section here applies to the Related Questions section on the Related Questions tab. So if I type in, for example, dog training and do a search, then when I click on how, who, when, then this is where the results all appear. And as before, if you've seen in the previous training, when you click on one of these, it helps you create a sentence against them. So that's the settings, the settings options for advanced users.